Hi folks, this is the second April video for our older elementary kids church. We're exploring the stories of Easter. I'm out here in my garden, and before we get into the story, I want to take you on a quick little tour. I wanted to show you these little buds. They're nestled down in the grass and hard to see. But these are dandelion buds. There's like 8 or 9 little buds down here, and they're all gonna grow taller. The stems will get longer, and they'll open up into those yellow flowers that are some of the very first flowers that pollinators can feed from in the spring. This is a violet. At this time of year, a lot of violets are growing in people's lawns and all around. They have 5 petals, 2 on the top and 3 on the bottom, and the stem is curved. There's usually white and yellow at the center, and they have little heart-shaped leaves. And as long as you know that the yard you find them in hasn't had pesticides put on it, violets are a flower that you can eat. They're just a little bit sweet. These are my radish sprouts. Planted these a few weeks ago. They're coming up, and I eat some of the sprouts, and I'll leave some of them to grow into full radishes. These little sprouts are going to be lettuce. They're pretty tiny right now though. See? So small. These sticks are the stems of milkweed that I planted last summer. And I don't know for sure that new plants are going to grow, but I'm hopeful. And if new things do grow here, I'll be sure to show you. So last week, the Easter story that we read from the Growing in God's Love Story Bible was the story of Jesus showing up to Mary Magdalene at the tomb. Mary was the only person who saw Jesus at the tomb. All the other disciples either didn't make it to the tomb, or when they showed up, the tomb was empty and nobody else was around. But Jesus did show up to those other disciples, and that's the story that we're going to talk about today. And instead of reading it from a story Bible, I want to tell you that story. And then I'll show you some pictures later as we ponder some questions about it. So the 11 disciples who were left, there were 12, but Judas betrayed Jesus, and after that, Judas also died. So there were 11 disciples who were left, and they were really scared. This was just a few days after Jesus died. And even after Mary and some of the other women came to them and said, the tomb is empty and we saw angels and Jesus is alive, and Mary Magdalene said, I saw Jesus, the disciples still really didn't believe that that could even be possible, because it seems impossible that someone could be dead and then be alive again. But while they were all gathered in a room having dinner, the door to the room was locked because they were scared. They were on the second floor of a building in an upper room. And even with the door locked, Jesus came to them in the room. And at first, they were completely surprised, and they thought maybe Jesus is a ghost. But Jesus showed them his hands where he had been on the cross. There were holes in his hands. And he asked for a piece of fish, and they gave it to him, and he ate the fish, and he said, look, can a ghost eat food? I'm really with you. And the disciples, when they saw Jesus, could finally believe that Jesus really was alive again. But there was one disciple missing. One disciple, Thomas, wasn't able to be with them that night. He had something else that he had to do. And so the next day, when all the disciples were talking about seeing Jesus, Thomas was still in the same place that those disciples had been the day before. He said, I can't believe this. It's impossible for someone to be dead and then alive again. I won't believe it unless I see Jesus myself. And that night, when Thomas was able to join the other disciples for a meal, Jesus showed up again, just for Thomas, just to show Thomas in person that he really was alive again. Sometimes Thomas gets a bad rap. Sometimes he gets called Doubting Thomas because he had doubts about the resurrection longer than the other disciples. But I actually really love that Thomas wants to see Jesus himself. He's not just going to take someone else's word for it. And Jesus honors that need. Jesus shows up just for Thomas. So I think that's pretty special. And that's part of the reason that I wanted to take you on a tour of my garden today. Because even though I've lived on this planet for 40 years, and I've seen a lot of springs, there are some times in the middle of winter when it is still hard to believe that spring is really going to come. And to see those buds coming up on branches, to see the little sprouts of seeds coming up in the dirt, to see the little buds of dandelions nestled in the grass, to see the first flowers coming like violets, and even to see the places where I planted things last year and I'm still not sure that they're going to grow. All of those little growing things in my garden make it easier to believe that the things that I've planted in the past will grow. And I think that's true in all of life, that the little signs of growth that we see, the little signs of hope that we have all around us, can help us believe some of the bigger things that we might have to trust will happen in the future. I think that we can trust that God will show up for us in the ways that we need to believe and hope in some of the bigger promises that we have of God's love. When we have those times of doubting that God is really with us, or that Jesus really is alive in our world, or that we really can be the people that God is calling us to be, God will give us what we need. God will show up with the encouragement that we need to trust and to believe that there are new possibilities around the corner. So now let's move into some questions to ponder together. I wonder what things it is hard for you to believe. I wonder if there's any sort of evidence that would make it easier for you to believe. I wonder where we meet Jesus today. I wonder if you've seen Jesus. Jesus came into a room even though the door was locked. I wonder what places Jesus shows up in our world and in our lives, even if doors are locked.